Warning, this video contains opinions you're going to disagree with. Prepare to smash the dislike button. First, I'd like to make it clear that I'm a huge Godzilla fan. It's one of those franchises that I loved ever since I was 10 years old. But just because I'm a fan, that does not mean I accept everything it did. Even I have some issues with it, but I don't hate it. I am not a Godzilla hater. This video is simply about giving the franchise some tough love. You will hear plenty of unpopular opinions from me, but someone had to say it. And I chose to be that person. Because that's like the thing I do here. Godzilla is one of the longest running franchises with films, television shows, comics, games, toys, spanning for over 65 years and still going to this day. But we're going to focus on the films, in which I noticed a problem. A recurring issue that keeps hurting the films and is what keeps it from moving forward or improving. It's a problem no one talks about because they don't see said problem. This problem is simply Showa era nostalgia pandering. Now to explain what I mean, first I need to ask you the following question. What is Godzilla? If you're going to answer with, oh, Godzilla is a symbol of atomic war and he represents, then I'm going to stop you right there. While that is the answer you want to give, deep inside you want to answer with this.
I'm a man too, you know. I go pee-pee standing up.
I don't know.
This is what people think of when you say Godzilla. Guys in rubber suits destroying building models and stomping on toy tanks. Bad special effects and bad dubbing where the words don't match mouth movements. This is the stereotype that stuck to Godzilla and the entire kaiju genre, and still stuck all the way across the 90s when Mighty Morphin Power Rangers premiered, and still to this day. Now the following thing might be a huge shock to all of you, so prepare yourselves. Godzilla was never taken seriously, neither in Japan nor in the West. The fandom have this rose-tinted view on the 1954 film, viewing it as this Oscar material that everybody praises and think it's the best film ever made, when in reality it wasn't. While it was a financial success for Toho, the reception ranged from mixed to negative, ranging from minor criticism like criticizing the sillier effects, some awkward acting moments, to more harsh criticisms like accusing the director and writer Ishiro Honda of exploiting the tragedies of war to draw attention to his film. Keep in mind, Godzilla was released in 1954, 9 years after the 2 nuclear strikes and the Tokyo firebombing, so the memory was still fresh in Japan, and naturally, people were not comfortable seeing the same imagery in the film. Nevertheless, it was still a huge success, selling 9.61 million tickets, and naturally, they made a quick cash grab with 1955's Godzilla's Counterattack, the one you know as Godzilla Raids Again, or Gigantus the Fire Monster. Unlike the first film, this was simply a monster film for entertainment. The plot and themes are less sophisticated than Godzilla, no political or environmental messages beyond a short "we will rebuild" message, making it a pure pop conflict. But unlike the first film, Godzilla's Counterattack was considered a disappointment and Toho thought they could do nothing more with it, so they decided to bury Godzilla and move on with other projects and more successful monster flicks. Over to the west side of the world, Godzilla barely fared better there. Unlike in Japan where Godzilla was the first of its kind there, it was nothing special in America. It wasn't the first monster film, it wasn't the first film utilizing rubber suit techniques, and it wasn't even the first to use nuclear power themes. The only thing that made it stand out was the country production and the highly pompous title King of the Monsters. Even though Kong existed and he was king first, and he'll probably ask who this outsider is and why he's declaring himself king on his soil. Reception wise, it wasn't any better. It was described as awful and cheap. Raymond Burr was criticized for his phoned-in acting, And even acclaimed film critic Roger Ebert called it an inept, so bad it's good film in his review of the 1985 version.
That's Raymond Burr, of course, and he and Godzilla are the only two survivors from the original 1956 movie, which became a camp classic because it was so bad. Well, this movie may or may not become a classic, but it's equally bad.
It was so badly received, they tried to market the sequel as something else entirely to distance itself from the original, but you all know how that worked out. But that's not to say the 1956 King of the Monsters version had no significance, as it was what brought Godzilla to the global market. The title became synonymous with Godzilla, and Raymond Burr's character, Steve Martin, became one of its icons, and for a long time, this was the only version accessible to the original Godzilla before the original 54 version became available outside fansubs and piracy sites. The American edit toned down the original commentary and didn't emphasize the themes of nuclear weapons as much as the original, and reduced it to a B-horror film like any horror film of the era. A great example of this is the ending. Steve Martin's final narration was on an optimistic level, saying a nightmare has ended and the world can live in peace again. But in the original ending, Dr. Yamane foreshadows a possible second Godzilla if the human race continues to make more nuclear bombs and learn nothing from this experience.
The menace was gone. So was a great man. But the whole world could wake up and live again.
もし水爆実験が続けて行われるとしたら、あのゴジラの同類がまた世界のどこかへ現れてくるかもしれない。
But in a cruel twist of irony, this is the version the Japanese audience preferred back in the day. Not only they brought King of the Monsters to their theaters, but they also dubbed it in Japanese, and they even included it in the 2004 premium DVD release Godzilla Final Box. And to give King of the Monsters one last credit, it kept it straight and serious, and didn't turn it to a parody making light of the subject matter. But that would be the last time Godzilla is taken seriously in a very long time. Jump forward in time, and Toho is planning to make their own King Kong film to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the studio. Godzilla was not Japan's favorite monster yet. Back then, it was King Kong. And yes, I'll let the irony that an American monster was Japan's favorite sit in for a moment. Originally planned as a King Kong vs. Frankenstein film, but Frankenstein and his monster were not available thanks to copyrights and trademarks and stuff. Also, some said it was stolen from Willis O'Brien, but that's a different can of worms. Anyway, Toho had to think of some other monsters to pit against Kong until they remembered that one guy they buried under the ice a few years ago. Yes, Godzilla was not even the first option when they pitched this film. He was Frankenstein's understudy. Godzilla was just lucky that time. Despite this change, King Kong vs. Godzilla would go in history as one of Toho's best films and one of their most financially successful ones in the franchise, selling 12.55 million tickets. But keep in mind, this is not Godzilla's film. It is still King Kong's film, hence why he got top billings in the title. Keep this in mind, the film's title is not Godzilla vs. King Kong, it's King Kong vs. Godzilla. The hero was King Kong, and he was still the one the audience cheered for. Godzilla was still the villain, or the heel in wrestling lingo, and despite all rumors and debates over the ending, the real winner at the end of the day was indeed Kong. However, it proved to Toho that Godzilla is still bankable, so they gave it another shot in their next installment, pitting him against one of the studio's other successful monsters in 1964's Mothra vs. Godzilla. And just like last time, the title tells you who's the real star here. It is Mothra. It is not Godzilla vs. Mothra, and certainly not Godzilla vs. the Thing. It's Mothra vs. Godzilla. He hasn't made his heel face turn just yet. Unlike Godzilla's counterattack, King Kong vs. Godzilla and Mothra vs. Godzilla featured more obvious satire and social commentaries, poking fun at TV business and commercialism in the former, and the business tycoons and capitalism in the latter. So in a way, they had more to feature than just wrestling matches. They had messages they wanted to give, even if their presentation was different. King Kong vs. Godzilla was comedic, and Mothra vs. Godzilla was serious. The latter also brought back the commentary on nuclear tests, which would be the last time in a while, as the next installment, things takes a different approach. Enter Three Giant Monsters, the greatest battle on Earth. more commonly known as Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. A film some would say the one that changed Godzilla for the better. I personally prefer to say the one where Godzilla jumps the shark. The last two films were a commercial success. Despite Mothra vs. Godzilla not reaching the same ticket sales as King Kong vs. Godzilla, but Toho figured out the right audience to market to. It wasn't adults, it was children. Starting from this film, Godzilla and his films went through drastic changes to make it more kid-appealing. The realistic, relatable commentaries, gone. The grittier, menacing tone, gone. The political allegories, gone. The haunting scenes of destruction reminiscing of war imagery, gone. Innocent human casualties, gone. Now it's just a nonsensical monster brawler with little to no connection to the actual plot, with more disconnection between the characters and monsters, with more emphasis on sci-fi and alien invasion stories. Fight scenes change from taking place in urban areas to barren wastelands where no collateral damage is made. Godzilla himself was the biggest victim of this change. Instead of being an unstoppable force of nature that cannot be bargained with or reasoned with and doesn't feel pity, remorse, or fear, letting his rage out on humanity for burning and scarring him with their bomb experiments and leaks lethal radiation fallout wherever he goes, now turned to a misunderstood guy who just wanted to be left alone, and all it took to convince him to love Earth, humanity, and making friends with other monsters to protect the planet was a simple talk with a worm. You know, if it was that simple to just talk to him, then why didn't Mothra try that in the previous film instead of wasting her laugh away?
Oh, Godzilla, what terrible language!
And even his design kept changing to be more simplified and more cartoonish looking. Godzilla got anthropomorphized to a comic book superhero, complete with all sort of broken logic and physics of the Silver Age. He is no longer recognized as the beast of terror he started as. He got twisted and perverted, making the original depiction pretty much dead. And it worked. These changes saved Godzilla and turned it to a pop culture icon in Japan, the US, and the entire world. But at what cost? This new campy depiction got so ingrained that several fans who got so used to it were extremely shocked when they managed to see the original Godzilla and witnessed how dark and straight it was compared to the goofy cartoony films they grew up with. But that didn't stop them from preferring the campy Godzilla. This is like moving from Tim Burton's Batman to Joel Schumacher's Batman, except in this case, the Joel Schumacher version is the fan favorite.
You lie!
Jump to 1968. After 6 successful films, Toho decided to end Godzilla's run with Attack of the Marching Monsters, more commonly known as Destroy All Monsters, a high-budget, big-scale crossover event pitting Toho's monsters against King Ghidorah in the distant future of 1999. Sadly, the film underperformed and didn't make its budget back, with just 2.5 million sold tickets. While it still sold more than Son of Godzilla that sold 2.48 million tickets, it was still too low compared to something like Godzilla vs. Ebert, in which sold 4.21 million tickets. But wouldn't you know it, Toho changed their minds and decided to let Godzilla go on a little further, because money talks and bullshit walks. Despite extending Godzilla's contract, it seemed like Toho had no idea where to take Godzilla from here. Each film following Destroy All Monsters felt like experimental films trying random ideas they didn't get to do in the past, without a clear, consistent roadmap. Godzilla, Minilla, Gabara, All Monsters Attack presented the monster world as figments of a child's imagination. Some speculate Godzilla was a work of fiction in this installment, meaning it's a film taking place in our real world. This film also brings back the social commentary aspect of the earlier films, this time about child bullying and to some extent parental neglect. It sold 1.48 million tickets. Next you have Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, one of the most bizarre and unique Godzilla entries for its ham-fisted environmental message, the return of dark imagery despite it still being marketed for kids, the weird animated segments, the unexplained psychic connection between the kid of the film and Godzilla, the psychedelic Save the Earth song, and it's also the first time Godzilla fights an enemy solo without a co-star since his fight with Mothra back in 1964. This is also the first film to have a Godzilla vs. title instead of a mouthful title or an enemy vs. Godzilla, at least in the Japanese version. But yeah, this is a weird one. It sold 1.74 million tickets, making it more profitable than All Monsters Attack, but still hardly a success. The following entry, Earth Attack Command, Godzilla vs. Gigan, is a return to the previous alien invasion formula, but in addition to have Godzilla and Anguirus talk, as in talk in human language, this was the first time the monsters show visible bleeding. Special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya was against showing blood, believing these films should stay kid-friendly, as was the direction of the franchise at the time, even though he was okay with it in Ultraman, but I guess Godzilla was for toddlers or something. He passed away in 1970, making All Monsters Attack his final Godzilla film that could not live to its premise thanks to wasting all the budget on the supposed finale a film earlier. So the studio, for lack of a better word, took this chance to do something he was against, adding gore to Godzilla. Ironically, this is what made Gigan a fan favorite, the first monster to make Godzilla bleed. It sold 1.78 million tickets, putting it slightly above Godzilla vs. Hydra. Next you have Godzilla vs. Megalon, one of the most infamous and campiest entries ever. A script that was not intended for Godzilla, rush production done without proper preparation, an extreme reliance on stock footage, a very cheap looking production quality making it look like a Z film. Godzilla's new design is often ranked as one of the worst designs ever for taking a heavily cartoonish look, the ramped up monster silliness. All of this led to make this film one of Toho's worst bombs ever, managing to sell 980,000 tickets only. In the West, however, it's a different story, as it became one of the most watched Godzilla films ever. A great factor in building its popularity was the long-time assumption that it was a public domain film, which made it easily distributed in drive-in theaters, VHS stores, and TV networks. And it's one of the two Godzilla films that had the dishonor to be part of Mystery Science Theater 3000 along with Godzilla vs. Ebert. And coincidentally, the two of them were based on a script not intended for Godzilla. Many fans believe, however, that Godzilla vs. Megalon is the film that ruined Godzilla's image in the West, since it was the most distributed film that made it the one seen the most and engraved Godzilla's pop culture image as a campy franchise for kids that cannot be taken at face value, MST3K notwithstanding. Not helping with the matter, the addition of the Gamera franchise, another film series aimed for kids, so it gave the impression the kaiju genre as a whole was what Godzilla vs. Megalon and Gamera films are, a bunch of cheesy rubber-suited monster films for children. And since I don't know if I'll get the chance to talk about it later, I should mention one of the stereotypes attached to the genre, the dubbing. Sadly, the franchise came at a time when Asian media dubbing was not taken seriously. I'll assume you are familiar with Kung Fu film parodies, right? When they mock the sound syncing and talking when the mouths are closed, and the exaggerated accents and overacting, especially for child actors. Unfortunately, that became one of the reasons why the Godzilla franchise is hard to take seriously, as even when it tries to take itself seriously, the dubbing is a little too silly for some crowd, and to other crowd, it's an essential part, and a proper professional voice acting would not fit. We'll get back to this last point later. After Godzilla vs. Megalon, Toho doubled down by making him a recurring character in their Giant Hero series Zone Fighter, where they turn Godzilla to the pet of the alien family and lives in a cave, only to be released when he is needed, which wasn't that often, so he's basically their prisoner in that show. Unfortunately, real-life events struck that same year of 1973, specifically the oil crisis, which forced many studios and stations to cancel some of their shows due to rising oil prices, which in turn raised the cost of productions. This is why Zone Fighter ended abruptly without a solid conclusion. The film, however, continues. In 1974, Toho released Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, an entry that won fans over with dropping the childish direction of the previous film, the iconic soundtrack, and the effects despite the lower costs the studio was having. While it did better than Godzilla vs. Megalon by selling 1.33 million tickets, it still couldn't earn its budget back, and Toho had to face the harsh reality that it is time to end Godzilla for real this time. And so, in 1975, they released Mechagodzilla's Counterattack, known also as Terror of Mechagodzilla, to be the grand finale of this long-running series, and sadly, it ended on a whimper, as it stands as the least attended Godzilla film in Japan, only managing to sell 970,000 tickets, less tickets than Godzilla vs. Megalon. Despite their efforts, Toho was unable to keep the Godzilla hype go forever. In addition to the rise of production costs resulted of the crisis, The audience the studio kept aiming for since 1964 had grown up and moved on to more important matters in their lives. The genre on itself was getting less mainstream and more niche, and was also saturated by tokusatsu television shows ranging from Kamen Rider to Super Sentai and the Ultra series. After all, why bother go to the cinema when you can get the same thing for free on TV, right? The studio's lack of direction was also a factor, as they couldn't stay consistent with their presentation, jumbling between tones and narratives without a direction. And that was Godzilla's legacy at the time, and as far as everybody knew, that was the end of the line. 1984, no, not the book, the year 1984. It's Godzilla's 30th anniversary, and Toho had recovered to get back to the game, and there was a resurgence of interest of the Big G. It's time for Godzilla to get back on the big screen for real. But instead of continuing where the last film left off, Toho decided to wipe the slate clean and ignore the mistakes they made from 1955 to 1975. Bring Godzilla back to his original roots, make it political, make him scary again, and no wrestling.
Get out! Get out! Get the hell out of here!
Longtime producer Tomoyuki Tanaka offered Ishiro Honda to direct a new film to make up for his past mistakes, but he declined his offer since he was still bitter over Toho's treatment of his baby. So instead, they hired Koji Hashimoto to direct. The 1984 film was met with positive reception and it was a financial success, giving the studio the push to make more in the future. Over in America, on the other hand, Toho intended to have a global distributor since the conception of the film. They were counting to expand Godzilla's new take on the world since it was already a well-known icon. Unfortunately, none of the big studios were interested in picking it up, and my guess it was based on Godzilla's reputation in America, a ridiculously cheap, cheesy film franchise below their big standards. Enter New World Pictures, the company founded by Roger Corman. Yes, that Roger Corman, who offered to distribute Toho's film for them, but they decided to make their own small alterations to match the American version of the original film. And by small alterations, I mean rewriting the dialogue to make it funnier and tongue-in-cheek parody. Because you see, this new Godzilla was too serious for the American audience. They're not used for a Godzilla that takes itself seriously, so their plan was to inject their comedy so they don't alienate the audience who came to laugh. Also insert new footage with American actors because the film was too Japanese or something. The only one who took this film seriously was returning actor Raymond Burr as Martin. What? Martin? What do you mean I can't say his full name? That is his name. Fine. Mr. Martin. Raymond Burr was the only one who took his role seriously since he didn't take Godzilla's subcontext lightly and refused to joke about it in a room full of clowns. He even refused to partake in the Dr. Pepper product placement. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Part of the distribution deal was a sponsorship by Dr. Pepper soda, and that's why cans and vending machines were present in the new footage. So on one hand, you had a film showing footage like this.
Godzilla's first appearance caught the Japanese and the entire world completely off guard. There were several thousand casualties, and not many people that saw him up close lived to tell about it.
And it was advertised like this. The film ended up as a failure and negatively received by critics and audience. Even with the amount of comedy injected by New World Pictures, it was still thought to be too serious. One infamous example comes from film critic Leonard Maltin, who said it was too serious to be funny and a big bore. Critic Roger Ebert gave it 1 star in his review and called it a catastrophe.
I give Godzilla 1985 1 star, and I'm Roger Ebert.
Other controversial changes done in addition to changing the message about world nations setting their differences aside against a single threat to a standard man against nature message was altering the script to have the Soviets purposely launching a nuke instead of having them attempting to stop a malfunctioning launching system. The original version presented the Soviets as something other than the enemy during the Cold War era, but the American cut reverted them to being the Red Scare again. In an interview with producer Anthony Randal, he says, "Laughs. That was totally me. It had nothing to do with Copen and Sloan. I don't think they ever saw the movie. That was a complete joke I did. Laughs. I did it. I remember looking over the film and trying to figure out how we were going to integrate scenes. I had a really funny idea. Let's make it so the Russians start the whole thing. Laughs. It had nothing to do with their politics. In fact, Harry Sloan was not conservative. He was very big in Democratic Party. Kupin, I think, was conservative, but Sloan was not. Bob Ramey was not either. He ran the company, so no, that was me. I'll take 100% blame for that. And to this day, I get the biggest laugh about it, because it was the Reagan era, and because I made it look like the Russians started the whole thing. It was a 1980s joke. A joke. A film that wanted to deliver a serious message about the nuclear horror and global relationships, and it was treated as a joke. That could sum up the entire deal. No matter how seriously Toho tries, those bloody Yanks of America will always turn it to a joke. Because Godzilla was always a joke there. Following the American box office failure and the general treatment to the film, Toho opted for releasing their films in American theaters, and it wasn't until Sony's purchase of Godzilla's rights that further Heisei-era films were imported to home video. Until Godzilla 2000 Millennium, Godzilla 1985 would be the last Japanese Godzilla film to play in American theaters. Jump to 1989, and Godzilla's next film and the first in the Heisei era, since 1984 was still technically the Showa era, Godzilla vs. Biollante, regarded as one of the best of the franchise and heavily praised for its creativity. It features the return of Akira Ifubuki's score, and Godzilla's new design would become the default Godzilla design to represent the character in commercial purposes. Despite having a positive box office returns, Toho still considered it a failure for not meeting expectations, selling only 2 million tickets in comparison to Godzilla 1984 that sold 3.2 million tickets. Why? There's no clear answer. It could be the wrong timing. Maybe it had strong competition. Perhaps it wasn't advertised enough. Or it didn't get enough word of mouth. Maybe it didn't target the right audience. Toho had a different answer in mind. The problem wasn't the monster. Toho was under the impression the audience didn't want to watch the film because they weren't familiar with Biollante, a new monster never seen before and doesn't match any of the classic monsters of the Showa era. Positive reception or not, Toho did not want to take another risk. Godzilla was already challenged by the public perception as a niche B film for kids, and the studio does not intend to end it prematurely. So what's the plan? Showa-era nostalgia. If original concepts won't work for them, then it's better to use familiar imagery just to be safe, and thus, the floodgates were open. Toho's first step was remaking their most profitable film in the series, King Kong vs. Godzilla. Except it didn't happen. Kong's international rights were at Universal's control and it was too expensive for them. Toho then decided to use Mechanicong, but that was also not an option since it was considered too similar to Kong, and it was also based on the Rankin Bass animated show, meaning it wasn't Toho original in the first place. With that idea off the table, it was decided to use Godzilla's most recycled enemy of the past, King Ghidorah, in 1991 Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. The plot was basically a remake of 1965 Invasion of the Astro Monster, but with time travelers instead of aliens. While Godzilla is known for having sci-fi elements, time travel is usually considered at the top fantastical plus added and takes away the grounded tone established in the previous two films. Mind you, last time they had a school of psychics, but it was still seen believable to say the least. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah abandoned this grounded approach and goes full-on sci-fi with spaceships, androids, laser guns, and cyborg monsters. It's the Showa-era cheesiness again in some of the more sophisticated writing of Biollante, and it was a box office failure thanks to the expensive production costs. But it sold more tickets than Godzilla vs. Biollante, so Toho took it as a success. The Showa-era nostalgia train goes on. Next year was Godzilla vs. Mothra, also known as Godzilla and Mothra The Battle for Earth, bringing back another classic monster. Now the plot is a remake of Mothra, Mothra vs. Godzilla, and King Kong vs. Godzilla with a very heavy-handed environmental message all in one script. And it was a huge success, selling 4.2 million tickets, making it the highest number of the Heisei series. There's also a subtle change made to Godzilla in this film. His roar. In the previous three films, he had a deeper, more animalistic sounding roar, but starting with Godzilla vs. Mothra, his roar reverts back to the higher pitched, more trumpet sounding roars of the Showa era. Next comes Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, bringing back Mechagodzilla and Rodan, another two iconic Showa-era monsters, and another box office smash hit thanks to the slashed budget, though less tickets were sold than Godzilla vs. Mothra. Unlike the Showa era, Toho knew they had to control themselves and end it at some point instead of going forever till they ran out of budget or suffered the embarrassment of low ticket sales again. Around the same time, Toho struck a deal with Sony Pictures to make their own version of Godzilla by the newly acquired TriStar Studios, the first American Godzilla film that's not an Americanized version of a Japanese film. That film got delayed, so Toho went further until TriStar seems themselves ready. So, the next film was Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, the closest in tone to a Showa-era film than any of the Heisei films. The monster is an in-your-face evil alien, Godzilla is the most heroic out of all the series, Baby Godzilla got redesigned to match Minilla instead of keeping the design of the previous film, so it kinda counts as bringing back another Showa-era monster. But the most baffling choice in my opinion is Mogura, who was not even a Godzilla character, yet they picked this one instead of another character associated with Godzilla? Oh, and it would be a Showa throwback without cheap-looking special effects. Despite receiving mixed to negative reception, it remained a commercial success, selling 3.4 million tickets. And at last, in 1995 comes Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, the final entry of the Heisei series with the bold choice of killing the cash cow instead of leaving it on an open ending, leaving room for future installments. It was darker, more serious, it links back to the 1954 film, but it still had to recycle something from the Showa era. Destoroyah was just Hydra under a different coat of paint. But they didn't call it Hydra, and it wasn't a sludge monster, so you could say it was the second most original monster of the series. The film was a huge financial success and sold 4 million tickets, making it the second most profitable entry of the era. And so, the Heisei run ends as a financial success for Toho. But it came with a huge sacrifice: originality. When Godzilla was revived, it was with the intention to distance itself from the goofy Showa-era incarnation, make Godzilla a scary monster to be feared instead of a superhero to cheer for. This plan did not go as intended. Instead, Godzilla was portrayed as some sort of anti-hero character. While still an enemy of humanity, he would still protect the planet and his family from danger, juggling between aliens and mutated monsters to man-made weapons. The political side was removed after Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah's controversial portrayal of World War II American troops that even Ishiro Honda said it was too far. Godzilla vs. Mothra had an environmental theme, but after that, there was nothing to call such. Monster Wrestling took a different approach as it focused on beam spamming and less physical attacks, which is attributed to the bulky suit designs that couldn't allow much of freedom of movement compared to the slimmer Showa suits. The series had a stronger continuity compared to the Showa era where every film felt like a standalone, though in this case it was simply a matter of one character appearing in all films starting from Godzilla vs. Bailanti, Miki Sagisawa, played by actress Megumi Odaka. But its narrative is where it's at its weakest. Before he passed away, Ishiro Honda was asked about his opinion on the Heisei films, and he described them as shallow and unimaginative. And when this is coming after Godzilla vs. Bailanti, the one praised for its originality and creativity, that says a lot. Of course, take note this was following Godzilla vs. Mothra. Ishiro Honda passed away before Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, so we can't tell what he would think of the rest of the series. But the fact remains, Toho chickened out when Godzilla vs. Bailanti did not give them the sales they were expecting, and changed course to the safe route, banking on nostalgia and familiar names and iconography instead of giving the new Godzilla its complete and original identity. And each success gave them the push to go safer and safer. The question we should ask ourselves, would these same films give the same results with new, different characters instead of recycling old ones? Leave the entire script and narrative as it is, but replace the featured monsters with completely new ones. For example, instead of King Ghidorah, it could have been a new dragon monster named Dorat. Maybe have 3 Dorats against Godzilla, though that would be too expensive to make. Instead of Rodan and Mechagodzilla, you could have something like Bagara and Cybersoul from the Dark Horse comic series. Something similar fulfilling the same role, but not a copy of the original. Godzilla vs. Mothra may require some changes if we were going with Batra alone, but you get what I mean. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah should be your answer. As I stated, Destoroyah is basically a reskinned Hydra, but since he's not called Hydra and looks different enough, it stands out as its own character and not another version of Hydra where you have to specify the era or film if you want to be more specific. And sorry, I don't agree with the argument that says original monsters won't sell to justify the constant recycling of the same characters over and over again. Because guess what? All these guys, all these fan favorites, yeah, they were originals too. And even if they didn't have a huge fan base at first, they still have a fan base demanding them to be brought back one way or another. So why bother getting lazy? Get creative if you really care about your product. Also, I don't think it was the right type of success. Since Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah underperformed thanks to the higher budget, all films following it slashed its budget and kept the costs at minimum possible, and the drop in quality of the effects and the miniatures is highly noticeable. But that's enough about the Heisei era for now. Going back in time for a bit, in 1992, Toho sold Godzilla's rights to Sony Pictures, who then assigned TriStar Studios to work on their version of Godzilla that was meant to come in 1994. Then it was delayed to 1996, but eventually was cancelled for two reasons. One, it was too ambitious, as in it was very expensive, which led to firing of the director Jean Debon and replaced him with Ronald Emmerich and Dean Devlin for failing to reach an agreement that works for everyone. 2. Disaster films were the current rage, and Sony chose to ride that trend instead of a monster wrestling flick that has been done to death since the 1930s and going through a fatigue all the way to the 90s. For more details on the history of this version, visit the article on sci-fi-japan.com, or if you want to read the script in comic form, visit americankaiju.kaijufile.com. Links will be provided below. Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin were known for producing highly profiled films with modest budget like 1994 Stargate and 1996 Independence Day, which made them an ideal choice for this project instead of John DeBond, who asked for too much money. Ironically, their Godzilla film would end up costing as much as John DeBond's asking price, but it was too late to rectify that. On making TriStar's new version, director Roland Emmerich said he didn't want to make the original Godzilla. He wanted to make his own Godzilla. And producer Dean Devlin followed by saying he didn't want their new Godzilla to be nostalgic, meaning they wanted to make this film their way, ignoring everything that came before and whatever established about it, and make their own Godzilla its own thing, including how he looks and how he acts, with the exception of the core concept of a creature radiated by nuclear power turning to a huge challenge for humanity. Godzilla's new design was done by Patrick Tatopoulos, which looked like the original concept design by Ricardo Delgado's modern theropod-inspired design, but slimmed down. The Tatopoulos design was intended to make Godzilla more like an animal than a guy in a monster suit, and gave it lizard-like abilities that includes borrowing, the asexual reproduction by pathogenesis, and later the ability to change color like chameleons, though that last ability was later scrapped in production. One change that was controversial thanks to a content leak was removing Godzilla's radiated heat breath and replacing it with stronger gust of wind they labeled power breath. This was changed later in film to turn it to a flammable gas breath, but early commercials and tiny toys and video games shows the aerial non-flammable wind attack, or tornado roar as one commercial calls it.
This tornado roar is too powerful! We need bigger guns!
Now I'm pretty sure you all know how the film turned out. But despite the negative reception it received, it was still a huge financial success, earning $379 million over a budget of $150 million. The film did not bomb as many people believe. It wasn't a failure. A bomb is not when a film receives negative reception. Even in Japan, it sold 3.90 million tickets, placing it between Godzilla vs. Destoroyah and Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Regardless, the 98 Godzilla's infamy grew immensely as one of the worst things to bear the name of Godzilla, that for a time, this iteration was known as Gino, as in Godzilla in name only, and was the butt of many jokes across the fandoms. And it's all because two guys wanted to do something different instead of pandering to the fandom by repeating the same things they saw over and over again. And financially, they did succeed as planned. So now the question here, would the 1994 Jean Debon draft be better? When someone brings it up, the fandom automatically says yes, but I don't think they bother to look at the screenplay itself. Reading the screenplay and the fan comic side by side, I'd say there's a chance it would piss the fandom off more, if not more than 98 Godzilla. Oh sure, Godzilla's design by Stan Winston Studio is closer to the traditional Godzilla and there are monster wrestling, but the narrative itself has major flaws. For starters, Godzilla is not an ancient Earth creature or an ancient dinosaur exposed to radiation. He's a bioengineered weapon made by aliens, completely removing any connection to nuclear weapons or any World War II references. So he doesn't fight out of hatred towards humanity or out of love to the planet or to expand his territory or even for being a confused animal. He fights because he's designed to fight. He's basically a living gun manufactured out of a factory for battles without a personality or attachment to anything. In all versions, Godzilla was always depicted to have a connection between him and humanity's hubris against nature or themselves. That's one of his core elements and why he was taken more seriously than any typical film monster. Even GMK Godzilla, which is basically a ghost, kept the themes of World War II and the anger of all war victims who felt the new generations were forgetting about them and the atrocities committed in the war. Jean de Bon's Godzilla did not respect any of that and changed him to the most generic alien weapon origin that you could think of, and we all know how Alien was affected by this. I mean, give American Devlin some credit. At least they remembered to keep the radiation by bombs part in their take. And they're the ones who wanted to make it more original. Then you have the part where the army defeats him. Oh, I'm not talking about falling to a pit, or buried under ice, or distracted to go somewhere else, or any of these tactics that delay his progress. I'm talking defeated, as in they knocked him out cold and carried his body somewhere else where he stayed out of cold for a great portion of the screenplay. And it wasn't by conventional weapons, but by amniotic fluid. Seriously. Now yes, Godzilla was this close to defeat in some films like in the 1984 version, but it was done by a super weapon, and he quickly revived and turned the tables on the humans thanks to the nuclear storm caused by intercepting the loose Soviet missile. Not by something like spraying him with baby fluid and then carrying him and parading his body in the air while some kids make a poop joke out of it. Oh yes, there was a poop joke in this version that was supposed to be more respectful to Godzilla's roots. There was no poop joke in the 98 film. So that's still 2-0 in favor of American Devlin. And then you have what I consider the most insulting part in my opinion. Godzilla running away from his enemy because he can't use his atomic breath on him thanks to an inhibiting machine. This is where I call bullshit in this screenplay, because even if Godzilla could not use his atomic breath, he still has his physical strength, and if he'd die, then he'd die fighting where he stands. Not retreating for safe space or scaring an all-four like a mouse as the screenplay puts it. Even Dark Horse Godzilla, who was poisoned and dying with blood streaming from every hole in his body, did not back off against the Cybersaur and stood fighting until his strength gave on him. And when he was still recovering after getting the vaccine, he hadn't recovered to fire his heat ray yet, but he improvised and used whatever he had in his disposal to fight Bagura, like shoving a car down his throat. That's experience for you. Until he got his heat ray back and obliterated him. TLDR, Godzilla is never a coward. You failed, John DeBon. You failed big time here. Give Godzilla 98 more credit here. While he was running from the military, it was because he was overwhelmed, but he also used the environment for his advantage and tricked them to destroy each other, and he came victorious not once but twice. Meanwhile, Godzilla 94 retreats just because he can't burn his enemy's face? Fail! Big fail! If this was the version we had, would the fandom complain how they butchered Godzilla's character and nerfed him against the human and made him a coward for the next 20 years and counting? Or they would ignore all of that just because Big Lizard go punch punch punch? Which brings us back to the original question. What is Godzilla? Is it a metaphor about war? Is it a warning on nuclear energy? Is it a superhero? Is it humanity's enemy? Is it an environmental protector? Is it a tragic character who can't fit in this world? Or is it just about wrestling matches where they destroy everything just because they're bored? 98 Godzilla's legacy would live on. While it didn't get to have a sequel film, it rose in popularity with an animated sequel series, and the fandom eased on the monster and slowly accepted him for what he is. The general script would later be repurposed for the 2014 Godzilla, and Godzilla's origin as a weapon would be used in the Heisei Gamera trilogy. But Toho heard the calls, and not wanting to end it there, they dragged Godzilla out of his retirement 6 years too early to give the fandom the Godzilla they wanted to have. In 1999, Toho brought Godzilla back in the second Heisei series, more commonly known as the Millennium series, or alternatively, the X series, after the X in the titles, replacing the word versus or tie. Following the steps of the first Heisei series, this is going to ignore all previous versions except for the 1954 films. However, instead of going in one straight continuity like the previous series, the Millennium series is presented as an anthology with each installment being their own continuity and their different takes on the characters. But in hindsight, Toho's new comeback was having a new challenge, and one would say they made a grave mistake by returning too soon after the last one. By the late 90s and early 2000s, the audience was fatigued from giant monster films, and they were no longer interesting except to the otaku crowd. So, Toho's new challenge was to find a way to make Godzilla mainstream again, and the solution they came up with was repeating what worked for them last time: Showa-era nostalgia pandering. Godzilla 2000 Millennium is the first of the new continuity, and it did not take any risks. Right off the bat, he is pitted against an adversary instead of having another solo entry. And for the first time since the Showa era, he fights against an alien race, not counting Space Godzilla who was a space monster, but without any affiliation with an alien race controlling him. The tone was similar to the Showa era, leaning more to the camp side, though not as over the top. The new monster was a new one, so Toho took a chance with that as opposed to recycling an old one for his grand return, and the reason they did was, as pointed by many fans, was to be a jab to the 98 Godzilla. Orga's head is modeled to look like it, plus being a clone of Godzilla, so haha, the joke is an inferior copy. The film underperformed with only 2 million tickets sold, equal to Godzilla vs. Biollante, the lowest attended Heisei film, and earned 1.65 billion yen over a budget of 1 billion. Since Sony still had the rights for the franchise, it was decided to distribute the film in a limited theatrical release in America a year later. Toho already had an international English dub provided by Hong Kong-based studio Omni Productions, who also provided the English dub for the Heisei films. But Sony decided to not use that dub and instead re-edit the film themselves, changing the music and sound effects, and rewrite the script to make it funnier and campier with silly voice performances.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Because even in the year 2000 and a new century and a new era, Godzilla was still seen as nothing but camp. It's a repeat of the 1984 Godzilla, except this time there are no American footage or American actors shoehorned in, and no awkward product placement. Jeez, what kind of a world we're living in when King Kong vs. Godzilla, the one made to be intentionally funny, was the one taken more seriously in America than its country of origin? Part of me also wants to believe Godzilla 2000 was tailor-made for American audience. For the first time in his films, Godzilla is colored green and his heat ray is fire red, which has always been the color choice in American media. Then you have the main characters, a small town-sized group following Godzilla around, not too dissimilar to the teams of the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, Dark Horse Comics, and Godzilla the Animated Series. All American-made spin-offs. The American version failed at the box office, earning $10,037,390 over a budget of $1 million spent on the dub and edits, combined with additional $10 to $12 million spent on marketing. But the fandom preferred this version, and even Toho acknowledged the superiority of the American edits over their version. Back to Japan, Toho wanted to try again with Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, G Extermination Command, with the plan to make it even campier than the last film, and the monster is a recycled Showa-era monster, the Meganolon from the 1956 Rodan. Not only was it another financial disappointment, but it also sold less tickets than the last one, with just 1.35 million tickets. The next installment, Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, was both a return to basics and trying new stuff never done before in the franchise. It goes back to using social and political commentaries that were absent from past films. It was darker, showed more innocent casualties. Godzilla's design was changed to match the original 1954 design as opposed to the 90s spiky edgelord green Godzilla, and made him a villain again after leaning between a hero and anti-hero in the more modern versions. What's different here is taking a mystical and spiritual approach with the characters as opposed to the traditional naturalistic sci-fi approach the franchise is known for. The rest of the cast went through significant changes, with Mothra not having her twin fairies, and King Ghidorah taking a heroic role instead of being a traditional villain he was, unless you count Mecha King Ghidorah. And despite these changes, GMK ended up as the highest attended film of the current run, selling 2.4 million tickets, and earned 2.71 billion yen over a budget of 1.2 billion yen. and to this day ranks as one of the most favorites in the fandom. GMK is considered the most original Godzilla in a very long time, yet managed to keep the standard monster wrestling formula with a twist of everybody against Godzilla instead of Godzilla against everybody, if you get what I mean. Part of the success was hiring director Shusuke Kaneko, who directed the Heisei Gamera trilogy, and he brought the same quality to GMK: great looking effects, memorable characters, and quality storytelling. But Toho, being Toho, still could not let the film as it is without interfering with its production. The original plan was to use Anguirus and Varan, but Toho rejected them because they believed they didn't have a strong marquee value to draw in the crowd, and got replaced with the more popular Mothra and King Ghidorah. So even when Toho wants to pander to the Showa crowd, they play favorites on who gets the spotlight. At this point, I'm surprised Baragon was kept in the film and didn't replace him with Rodan, but Toho didn't care enough about Baragon if he was snapped out of the title. Baragon preferred working with Tsuburaya Studios over Toho anyways. Even with heavy makeup on, they still give him more work and respect than Toho ever did. Next comes Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, or Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, because someone realized calling it Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 3 makes no goddamn sense. And judging by the title, the enemy is of course Megalon. Nah, of course it's Mechagodzilla. Except they don't call it Mechagodzilla here, they call it Kiryu, which begs the question why they didn't just call the film Godzilla vs. Kiryu and make it a separate new robot adversary with separate copyright icon unrelated to Mechagodzilla and save us the awkward Mechagodzilla branding. Mechagodzilla 2? Mechagodzilla 3? Kiryu is already different enough from the previous version since it's a cyborg instead of a pure mech, so that's another reason why it should be its own thing instead of a Mechagodzilla. The tone of the film was less campy, but not as dark as GMK. Godzilla is played as an enemy here like the last time, and it was a financial success, earning 1.91 billion yen, but attendance number was significantly less with 1.70 million sold tickets. Instead of leaving it as a standalone film, the next film, Godzilla, Mothra, Mechagodzilla, Tokyo SOS, is a direct continuation of the previous film instead of a new unrelated story. Not only that, but it's also a direct sequel to 1961's Mothra, another Toho classic from the Showa era. While it's supposed to be a sequel, it pretty much repeats the events from last time, but with new characters replacing the ones we grew to love, and with Mothra into the mix. It performed less than the first part, earning just 1.30 billion yen with just 1.2 million tickets, selling less than Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. With these constant losses and the inability to get even close to the returns of the Heisei era, let alone TriStar's Godzilla, Toho once again had to face the end of the franchise. But this time they took advantage of the upcoming 50th anniversary of Godzilla and decided to make the final film, Godzilla Final Wars, to be an all-out Showa era extravaganza and the most over-the-top entry ever. Aliens, plenty of Showa era monsters not seen since that time, all sense of reality is tossed aside, kung fu action, high-octane chases, throw a reference or two to American films to appeal to American film fans. This is going to be the best finale ever, and it bombed. Hard. At 4 billion yen, as in the highest budget given to a Japanese Godzilla film in history, it only made 1.26 billion. Ticket sales? Just a measly 1 million ticket, making it the worst performing Millennium Era film and the third worst performing in the franchise, right after Terror of Mechagodzilla and Godzilla vs. Megalon. All that pandering did nothing for them, and Godzilla's 50th anniversary in 2004 ended on a silent whimper compared to the bang of Godzilla vs. Destroyer, an event that reached global news even when Godzilla was niche outside Japan, and even made a mock-up funeral to it. Final Wars ended as an embarrassment for Toho. They knew the risks, they knew they were fighting a losing battle, and they lost it that this time they committed to keep Godzilla's retirement and never make more films in a long time.
No more! I'm sick of Godzilla!
The Millennium series was intended to be Godzilla's comeback following fan disappointment over TriStar's film. But thanks to Toho's rush plans to appease said fans, they instead turned it to a sour memory with the massive failure of Godzilla Final Wars. And following that year, there was a drought in Godzilla content beyond comics, toys, and video games, and occasional cameos here and there. But a Godzilla feature picture? That wasn't happening. but did not stop other attempts to make one. TriStar's rights expired in 2003, thus allowing somebody else to work on the IP. From 2003 to 2009, there was a Godzilla film in development titled Godzilla 3D to the Max, also simply known as Godzilla vs. Deathla, intended for IMAX screenings, developed by Yoshimitsu Banno, who directed Godzilla vs. Hedorah. It would have been the second American attempt at an all-American Godzilla film after TriStar's 1998 film, but it went to a halt when Legendary Pictures purchased the rights in 2010 and worked on the reboot with Warner Brothers, and it was officially announced in San Diego Comic-Con 2010. In 2013, Legendary Pictures released Pacific Rim, a throwback of giant monsters and giant robot genres, in which met with positive reception and became a huge financial success, and boosted the fans' confidence in what the upcoming Godzilla would be like. Legendary's Godzilla, directed by Gareth Edwards, hit theaters in 2014, Godzilla's 60th anniversary, and was met with both critical and financial success, being the biggest opening of 2014 at the time. In Japan, it sold 2.23 million tickets, making a vast improvement over the failure of Final Wars from a decade earlier, and it gave hope to Toho about Japan's love for their monster. Going against the traditional takes made in the past, Gareth Edwards did not take the camp route. He directed his film as a serious and grounded Godzilla that is meant to strike fear and majesty, instead of the tainted Showa-era superhero image that ruined the character for generations. His Godzilla is depicted as an anti-hero force of nature, and the human side of the story is presented as a serious drama, making it closer to early Heisei-era films. Personally, the black and red visuals remind me of the 1984 film. And to make this film stand out more, he introduced two new monsters, the male and female Mutos, instead of copying another random past monster for the 100th time. And yes, I know they made new monsters because Toho did not license other monsters from their library, but that just shows you can get creative when you don't have the easy options. If only more directors did the same. The film still had its detractors. Most common complaint directed to it was Godzilla's screen time, going as far to say it was less than all Japanese films in the franchise, when in actuality, his screen time was on the average length at roughly 10 to 12 minutes, in comparison to some fan favorites like Invasion of the Astro Monster, where it was at 5 minutes, or even the 1954 film where it clocked at near 9 minutes. Godzilla's screen time in the 2014 film was still more than the original, yet the original is still a masterpiece. The other general complaint was about the humans taking too much focus, which makes me wonder if this came from the general audience who are unfamiliar with the giant monster formula, or the fans, because if it was the general audience, then it's more understandable if they're not familiar with it. If it was by the fans, then that's a head-scratching statement, because the fans should be familiar with the formula since they presumably grew up with the films and saw them many, many times to know how it works, and they should already know Godzilla does not take that much screen time. So why is it new to them here? And if the new Godzilla was just the wrestling matches and never saw the films incomplete, then they should know the wrestling part takes little time if you could fit them all in a single YouTube clip uploaded in 2009. Better not tell them the titular Ultraman, the show title Ultraman, is barely in it as well. That will blow their minds. And while Gareth Edwards made his film as a standalone entry with no sequels in mind, it was the age of cinematic universes, meaning Warner Brothers wanted to make more. Now, I shouldn't talk about Kong Skull Island since it's technically a Kong film, but I will say it was excellent and John Vogt-Roberts is an excellent director. Give him more films to make. So we jump to 2019 with Godzilla 2 King of the Monsters. Gareth Edwards did not come back to direct, so instead it was handed to Michael Dougherty, and the difference in direction between the two is night and day. Gareth Edwards directed this film as a serious, grounded drama. Michael Dougherty chose to embrace the sci-fi camp. Post-apocalyptic setting. Monarch is given a bigger role as scientists tracking monsters with their secret bases and gadgets, keeping the same tradition of past American adaptations. The script is less serious and filled with jokes. Monster Western take a less grounded approach and embraces the more fantastical elements and superpowers. And even the terrorists act like your typical alien invaders that controls the monsters like the Zillions and the Kiloks, except they're humans instead of aliens. The monsters are of course the same tired ones recycled yet again. It's always those two, King Ghidorah and Mothra. Oh, and Rodan is here, but it's King Ghidorah and Mothra for the 100th time instead of using one of the new originals who got reduced to cameos. And there's the fan service. Oh, I don't mean a subtle backdrop Easter egg, I mean in-your-face references, from random terminology to names to objects. The Easter eggs in 2014 Godzilla were just random stuff they don't bring attention to because the film knows the focus is on the events and characters. King of the Monsters hammers these random references every minute or two, as if it's afraid the audience is going to forget what film they're watching, and most of them are just references for the sake of referencing without the weight of meaning behind them, like the Oxygen Destroyer. You know, that thing from the 1954 film that was a huge deal in it and equated to the atom bomb, and the inventor and main character sacrificed themselves so no one could create it again, only to create microorganisms that evolved to a devil crab in one of Godzilla's toughest battle where he died and passed his life to his son to carry his legacy. You know, that Oxygen Destroyer. In King of the Monsters, it was just a random bomb that comes out of nowhere without any hint or build-up and without an ounce of an impact or effect on the whole narrative. That's not fan service, that's just a lame reference for the sake of a reference without appreciating what it stood for.
もしも一旦このオキシジェンデストロイヤーを使ったら最後、世界の為政者たちが黙って見ているはずがないんだ。必ずこれを武器として使用するに決まっている。
We have been developing a prototype for a new weapon, an oxygen destroyer, designed to exterminate all life forms within a 2-mile radius.
原爆対原爆、水爆対水爆。その上さらにこの新しい恐怖の武器を人類の上に加えることは科学者としていや一個の人間として許すわけにはいかない。
And while the fans defending the film for the critics is nice and all, that doesn't mean the critics were wrong. The narrative is a step down from the previous film. The tone does not match. The dialogue is terrible.
I think this is the one where the genitals are blurred out.
Big fan of your wife's work. And you. That came out so weird.
Get what?
She's a gonorrhea.
Godzilla, they got a thing going on? That's kind of messed up, right?
I really don't fortune cookie.
Because I still want to have kids one day. Preferably without flippers.
My God, Zilla.
Is it just me, or has he been working out?
You kidding me? Sarazawa's got that lizard juiced.
Damn right.
I'm saying in about 12 minutes, it's gonna be a bad day to be a Red Sox fan.
If I had these two from Paris, I'd run away from home too.
There are too many characters to keep a focus on, and cinematography or the fight scenes were bad. When Jordan Vogt Roberts worked in Kong Skull Island, it felt like he was addressing the issues people had with the first Godzilla film. He gave Kong a lot of screen time. He made him appear earlier instead of a slow build-up. The night scenes were clear to look at, and the climax battle was bright and shot in a way it makes everything clear to look at. The fights in King of the Monsters were a big step down. Not only they were all too dark to look at, but they had a lot of garbage flying around. You can't get a good look at what you're supposed to look at, and the shaky cam did not make things any better. You can't even tell what color the monsters were. When I worked on customizing my Monster as King Ghidorah, I had to Google the merch to know what the exact colors are. And I'm sorry, if I needed to do that instead of using the film itself as a reference, that's a big flaw there. The fight scenes in the 2014 film were in the dark, but the camera was steady, and they didn't have random garbage filling the screen up obscuring what you're supposed to look at. King of the Monsters was chaos. That's the best description that I could give it. Chaos.
Too much chaos. Everything's chaos.
And in addition to the harsher criticism, King of the Monsters underperformed at the American box office, only managing to success thanks to international returns. Even in Japan, it didn't do so well, selling 1.92 million tickets only. In terms of awards, Godzilla 2014 won the Japan Cool Content Contribution Award given to creators who make Japanese media popular worldwide, was a contender for an Oscar nomination for sound editing, and was also nominated for Best Science Fiction Film Release and Best Film Music at the Saturn Awards. King of the Monsters was nominated a Razzie for the Worst Remake, Ripoff, or Sequel category. I wouldn't call that a victory for the fandom. If the 2014 film was nominated for one, it would be a different matter, but it wasn't. King of the Monsters was nominated. That's a step down. And before you pull the "all great film was nominated" Razzie card on me, my response to this is apples and oranges, different times, different circumstances, different pop culture. Our topic is on Godzilla, not other films. While the 2014 Godzilla is a film that gets better the more I watch it, King of the Monsters is a film that gets worse the more I watch it. And depending on how Godzilla vs. Kong fares, chances are it won't perform well. But unless something was announced, the so-called Monsterverse may not go much further than this. With the successful return of Godzilla on the big screen with Legendary's 2014 Godzilla, Toho decided maybe it was time for them to return to make Godzilla films on their soil, dependent from the American Virgin. Enter 2016's Shin Godzilla, formerly known as Godzilla Resurgence, Toho's first film in 12 years. This news of course brought hope to some sections of the fandom who refused to acknowledge Legendary's film as real Godzilla films and treated this announcement as the fourth coming? Return to its rightful owners. Oh, they're going to... wait, they're bringing that weirdo who made that robot anime with that gay emo kid? Godzilla's going to be CGI instead of a suit? Godzilla is a random sea creature instead of a dinosaur? Conventional weapons can't hurt him? No monster fights? The army defeats them? What the hell, Japan? Have you learned nothing from the 1998 disaster?
Yeah! Fire!
On paper, that does sound like a disaster. A controversial director that's been shat over by the anime community for years, a Godzilla that looks like a walking tumor than a dinosaur, and a solo Godzilla film which hasn't been done since 1998, and if that doesn't count since 1984, that would make it the worst Godzilla film ever and an obvious bomb, right? Except that against all odds, Shin Godzilla became the best-selling and most profitable Godzilla film in years. It earned 8.54 billion yen at the box office, beating King Kong vs. Godzilla unadjusted for inflation, and sold 5.69 million tickets, making it the fifth most attended Godzilla film in history after years of trials and errors that could not get close to these numbers. Sitting between Mothra vs. Godzilla and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, this type of success was never achieved since 1964. Not only that, but it won multiple awards including Best Film, Picture of the Year, Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Film Editing, Best Lighting Direction, Best Screenwriter, Best Recording, Best Actress, Best Visual Effects, and Best Director of the Year. It was also nominated for Best Actor, Best Music, Best Sound, and Best International Film Release. But how? How did this cheap, boring film become such a success, and not any of the other bombastic, action-filmed, high-budget wrestling events the fans liked and willing to murder any critic who dares to say they're bad? How did Godzilla jump from 1 million tickets in one of the worst Godzilla bombs ever to 5.69 million and receive several Academy Awards?
Does not compute. Does not compute. Does not compute.
The problem the franchise had was getting too stale and too repetitive. Toho did not allow much freedom in creative decisions, and 99 out of 100 times chose to go safe instead of risking breaking the formula, and that costed them dearly. By the time they decided to get back to business, they realized they needed to break the mold. That's where Hideaki Anno comes in. Who is more fitting for the job of saving Godzilla than the guy who saved anime when it was getting too stale with his magnum opus Neon Genesis Evangelion? And lucky for the studio, Anno is also a huge tokusatsu fanboy, and he had experience producing some live-action projects, and he is friends with fellow co-director Shinji Higuchi, who directed the special effects of the Gamera trilogy. Almost like anyone attached to the Gamera trilogy made some of Toho's biggest hits. Also, without Shinji Higuchi, Hideaki Anno would not have taken the job after he turned down the offer. So without Higuchi, Anno would not have worked here. But still, Anno did not expect Shin Godzilla to be the success that it is, and dismissed any chance of it winning because deep inside, he knew Godzilla would not reach that level of recognition no matter how much effort he puts his heart on.
シン・ゴジラが流行語大賞にノミネートされたということについてどう思ってるかという
ありがとうございます。
どういうような感想？
いやあまりないです。
もしそういう表彰式に選ばれたら？
いや出ないです。東方の人が行けばいいです。そうです。僕は出ないです。
Boy, was he wrong. But there's got to be more of it. What did Shin Godzilla do right with none of the usual traditions of the franchise? Simple. It went back to its original roots, as in the time before he sold out to start his wrestling career. Ishiro Honda's original vision of the 1954 film, a social political commentary on Japan's post-disaster state and using Godzilla as an allegory to show how terrifying it is, not glorifying it.
原爆というものの怖さみたいなものをこれがね、持ってっていうことでしたから、これやっぱりね、原爆がああいうものがあったからこそね、これが生まれたんだよね。絶対にそうですよ。そうじゃなくてただこれをね、昔のいわゆる恐竜時代の動物が出てきた、暴れただけではやっぱりね、
全然意味が違いますね。
違うと思うんですよね。これもやっぱり時代が生んだ、確かに。
That was the direction Anno went with. And lucky for him, Toho gave him free reign over his vision without forcing him to remove the commentary or force in a wrestling match to bait the toddlers. Godzilla always connected to World War II and nuclear bomb experiments. And when it's not about the war, it's about the danger of nuclear power. This theme was more prominent during the Cold War and in a time when nuclear power was only seen as an element of war and destruction. As time goes on, World War II and the Cold War impact has diminished, especially with the current generation that did not experience these events, and nuclear power became a common source of power around the world. So instead, Anno went with a different subject that was relevant to the Japanese society: the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, and the Fukushima nuclear reactor disasters, the worst disasters to hit contemporary Japan, especially the latter that is classified as the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl on level 7 of the International Nuclear Event Scale. But most damaging about it was the incompetence of the Japanese government, who were warned about the state of the reactors for years, yet failed to take action to prevent potential disasters due to underestimating the tsunami and lack of a manual for the workers to follow to prevent the meltdown. And to showcase this in the film, Anno chose to portray it from the government's perspective. The human cast in Godzilla films were always the following: civilians, scientists, reporters, soldiers, special forces, policemen, and children, but never the government, at least as the main role. This is a realistic depiction of the government dealing with Godzilla if it emerged in real life, which includes the numerous meetings, the change of commands, and underestimating the threat and wasting time figuring out what to do under which procedure instead of immediate action. Anno could have chosen to depict the disaster from civilians' perspective, but instead he went with the government itself, and show how flawed and complex it was by failing to prevent Godzilla's earlier attacks due to the long chains of bureaucracy and red tapes and lack of a procedure to follow in case of a monster attack, which includes the part where they should use the JDF in a non-war scenario. And he could have taken this chance to show how incompetent they are in a comedic satirical fashion, making a caricature out of the government and their politics, but he portrayed all the characters as people doing their honest job in a respective manner, just failing to take the right decision because it's an unfamiliar situation they never experienced before. And Japan won the battle by cutting all the red tapes and abolishing the system, and let everyone help no matter who or where they are from. All of this was relatable to Japan, and luckily, unlike the 1954 film, the audience didn't find it offensive or too soon for them, and they embraced the commentary and the message it brought up. And that's how Shin Godzilla ended up the way it was. It wasn't a Godzilla film for the sake of cheap entertainment. It was a Godzilla film with a clear message in a way that hasn't been done since the original 1954 film. And for the first time in history, Japan was finally proud over a Godzilla film, and not in an ironic way. And it's all because Toho allowed the creator to do what he wants outside the box. The only thing Toho was against was Godzilla himself. Anno wanted to go crazier with Godzilla, showing more mutated forms that ends with another version of his favorite giant character. But they put the hammer down since Godzilla was too iconic to change. It wasn't until Bandai intervened and suggested additional forms in which Godzilla starts as before reaching the final more traditional design.
形態変化のその第2、第3、第4段階展示されてますけれども、あの形態変化っていうものを取り入れたのはなぜなんでしょうか。
思いつきはふとしたことなんですけど、形態が変化した方が、ビジュアルとしてもあと映画としても面白くないだろうし、あと、東宝さんが最初それ嫌がってたんですけど、やっぱりゴジラというのはこういうものだっていうイメージがあるので、それを崩すのはちょっとっていうことがあったんですが、そこはいやバンダイさんが3つ出せて嬉しいですよと
なるほど、
そういう絡み手でいろいろほらこれ人気出ますよとかですね、いろいろ苦労してとりあえず3つ出せるようになりました。
and it worked for them. Not only Godzilla was brought back to his nuclear horror roots, but he also looks and acts distinguished enough to have his own identity. Over in the West, Shin Godzilla received a limited theatrical screening, the first time a Japanese Godzilla plays in American theaters since 2000. And the reception? Well, it wasn't as well as the Japanese reception. The fans hated the new design and think it's more goofy than scary. They hated the lack of wrestling, hated the focus on politics, and some of them even hated the English dub because it was too good. Too good is suddenly a bad thing. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the old dubs being one of the stereotypes of the genre. And despite Funimation doing their best to avoid the stereotypical Asian parody dub the films were known for, many people thought it was boring and not funny to make a joke out of it.
Typically American.
One of the defenses the fans make to defend King of the Monster against Shin Godzilla is Michael Daughtry is a fanboy. Okay, what does that mean? Fanboy could mean anything. He could be a fan for the wrong reasons. He could be a fan ironically, or simply did not understand what he's a fan of. We have seen instances of directors claiming to be fans of the source material they're adapting, yet they ended horrible and hated by the masses because they didn't get the source material.
I really want to make a Godzilla film that lives up to the legacy that inspired it.
Going to use One Punch Man as an example here. In my opinion, there are two types of fans of the series. The first type are the spectacle fans, the type who enjoys the action part of the series, where good guys punch bad guys. The second type are the intellect fans, the type who enjoys the non-action part of the series, where heroes just hang out and talk to each other on what it means to be a hero in a society ruled by heroes. In Godzilla's case, Michael Daughtry would be a fan of the spectacle part of Godzilla, giving the fans what they wanted, fight scenes and nothing else.
And what was really great about Michael Daugherty's take was his keen understanding for how to make it bigger, how to make it more expansive, how to make it more global, and also how to infuse it with a lot of action.
While Hideaki Anno would be the fan of the intellect part of Godzilla, giving the fans what they needed, a thought-provoking cautionary tale that is still relevant today. And sorry, I don't agree that Shin Godzilla is too Japanese to relate to. Maybe if you're a kid who is not familiar to how the adult world works, but if you're an adult, then you should be familiar with the concept of bureaucracy and how annoying and time-wasting it is. Insurance companies, healthcare, returning a broken item you bought from the store, you name it. There's always something preventing you from getting what you need to accomplish. If Shin Godzilla was made with an American commentary in mind, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans would be the closest thing to base on, with the slow response of the American government and the way they managed the crisis overall. Godzilla could still be used as an allegory for the hurricane, and the commentary would not be that different from the Japanese version.
I'm the government, I'm the government, I'm the reason nothing works.
With the success of Shin Godzilla, Toho went on to make more non-traditional Godzilla films. This time, the first animated Godzilla film. Not just one, but a trilogy of animated films, known commonly as the Planet Trilogy. 2017 Planet of Monsters, 2018 City on the Edge of Battle, and 2019 The Planet Eater. The trilogy was written by famous anime writer Gen the Butcher Orobuchi, who wrote acclaimed titles such as Madoka Magica, Kamen Rider Gaim, Psychopaths, and Fate/Zero. That's how you say it, right? I'm not familiar with the Fate series. Is that how you say it? Or is it Fate Zero? The animation was provided by the CGI-based Polygon Studios, who animated Knights of Sidonia and provided animation for a plethora of video games. The story leans heavily on the sci-fi, with a futuristic Earth where nature took over the planet, and Godzilla is a literal force of nature, being plant-based instead of the traditional animalistic Godzilla. And also the largest Godzilla ever, ending the tail measuring contest between Toho and Legendary for good, until someone makes a Gurren Lagann-scale Galaxy Godzilla. While the first part received some positive reception, the second and third had more negative reception by the fanbase. Not counting Polygon's base-breaking animation, the series suffered from what is considered bad execution of an interesting concept. The exposition was relentless, little to no action scenes, boring to unlikable characters, an unsatisfying ending, and the lack of monsters in a supposed Planet of Monsters, and leaving them all in supplementary material prequel not included in the films themselves. These films are commonly known to be Netflix originals, though that is a little inaccurate. While they are distributed globally by Netflix, each of the 3 films received a limited theatrical release before hitting the streaming service. In terms of ticket sales, they were the worst of the entire franchise. Planet of the Monsters sold 170,000 tickets, City on the Edge of Battle sold 140,000 tickets, and The Planet Eater sold 50,000 tickets. The complete opposite of Shin Godzilla's success. However, it should be noted the theatrical release was much more limited at 158 theaters than Shin Godzilla's wider release at 441 theaters. There's also the factor of online distribution made shortly after the theatrical release, so you could say the audience chose to wait until it hit Netflix instead of going to theaters immediately. With the reception of the trilogy, Toho's next project is looking like a course correction, but instead of films, it's an episodic series, and that's Godzilla Singular Point. The first thing done was making 2D animated characters mixed with CGI monsters instead of a complete CGI production. The second thing is sadly falling for the same trap they kept falling into: Showa-era nostalgia pandering. Before we get to know what the premise is, or even the names of the human cast, or who gets to play them, the first thing they show us was the return of the old Showa monsters. They even had to scrape the bottom of the barrel really hard if they had to include Gabara and not the usual cash return guarantee, though I guess King of the Monsters proved otherwise. At least the fandom appears to have gone up beyond the in-name only phase if they're totally accepting the new designs, or they're just blinded by nostalgia, you tell me. It's really a shame. Just when Toho finally got to pick Godzilla up and turn him to the new icon of cinema after the failed attempts of the past, they threw all of that away after one failed project. Instead of learning what they did right with Shin Godzilla, they went safe again. Maybe Shin Godzilla was a lightning in a bottle. Maybe it was so good no one dares to top it. But the over-reliance of nostalgia imagery is what kept dragging the franchise in the mud over and over again.
Now, you've probably heard me say this or seen me say this if you follow me on Twitter or if you're on the Toho Kingdom or Blu-ray.com boards, that I'm not the biggest fan of this overall package style, neither in terms of the size and format nor the artwork. Criterion as a label has this sort of cultured or sophisticated image that they tend to be associated with and informs their generally minimalist design, so this kind of very loud comic book art style with this never mind the bollocks color scheme is it's a little odd, and I feel like maybe condescending slightly to the films in a way. I mean, you know, obviously they're trying to sell these, and so they're giving credit where it's due when they're talking about it, but I can't help but, you know, sort of feel like it's just, oh, you know, it's a pop culture thing. It's like comic books. It's, you know, it's big and colorful, therefore it's, you know, 60s pop art, which, I mean, maybe Hedera, maybe Megalon, but it doesn't seem completely appropriate for all of these, but overall that's kind of a minor point.
The fans conditioned themselves to like the shallowest aspect of it, that any attempt to fix the course is met with discourse because it's not the stupid fun they like. What the fandom is saying is basically, screw your messages, screw whatever you want to get across, screw your deep themes, screw all the humans because no one cares about them, give us sweaty guys in fake as hell rubber suits destroying cardboard boxes WWE style. That's what we want from Godzilla. It's just a dumb thing for children, nothing deep about it, so stop pretending it's deep. We don't want to be taught something of value, we want dumb entertainment, so stick to that. It's Godzilla, not some Oscar novel. And unless that attitude changes, Godzilla's quality will keep degrading. Now in an age where fandoms are louder than ever and the studios are willing to listen to their complaints even if they're compromising their original vision. We had one excellent modern Godzilla film. Why can't we have more? By the way, if all you care about is the fighting, then Godzilla is not what you should watch. Go watch Redman instead. It doesn't have a plot, no characters, we have no idea who Redman is or why he's fighting. It's just a series of fights in the cheapest looking special effects you could imagine. That's the perfect show for you. Oh wait, they don't destroy buildings in this one. Never mind. There's a reason why the Heisei Gamera trilogy is still considered one of the best, if not the best kaiju films of all times, even among the most die-hard Godzilla fans. They were made by people who prioritize quality over quantity. Quality writing, quality effects, quality fights. taking their time instead of rushing a film every year. They didn't just throw in whatever quick and easy for them to do or try to evoke nostalgia in them by recycling all the previous enemies or remaking plotlines. They gave Heisei Gamera its own identity completely separate from the campy Showa films. And that was the secret behind their success. They cared to make an excellent product, not a quick cash grab. Toho cared about pumping films as quickly as possible without a care for their quality. They almost bankrupted themselves. Also, what held Gamera's case is, unlike Godzilla, the films did not go through an identity crisis. Gamera knew what it was and stuck to it, and that's why they remained consistent in tone and characterization. Godzilla did not. Like I said at the start of the video, I am not a Godzilla hater. I love Godzilla. I get my enjoyment out of the films. But it also frustrates me that Toho doesn't utilize its full potential and use Godzilla for what it is, and keeps reducing it for just wrestling with no substance and not bothering to make more original monsters because that's what they think drives the films. Nostalgia can be fine, but you can't rely on it forever. That's a problem Power Rangers went through in the Neo Saban era. It focused too much on the Mighty Morphin era over every other series, the comics, the team-ups, the toys, and even writing the later seasons to be like the Mighty Morphin era in tone. It wasn't until the Hasbro era that other seasons were finally getting the attention they needed, and the fandom could not be any happier. The Godzilla Showa era is done! Let us move on from it and allow Godzilla to evolve beyond evoking it. Maybe it's the adult fan in me. At a younger age, I did find joy in the fights. I liked the Showa film for what they presented. But as an adult, I get to appreciate the mature themes, the politics, the commentaries presented in the films that I did not catch on before, especially in the ones directed and written by Ishiro Honda. I'm in an age where I find a story dealing with Bruce Banner's mental health far more interesting than a story featuring the Hulk smashing stuff. And I think it's a waste they don't do it as much as they should. Films like Jaws, The Thing, Dawn of the Dead, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, RoboCop, Planet of the Apes, Jurassic Park are all considered cinematic classics with memorable characters and themes, despite being filled with characters talking to each other more than showing action sequences, and still remembered more for their commentaries than the action. But why is Godzilla frowned upon when it does the same thing? Why is the crowd capable of enjoying the cast of Dawn of the Dead fooling around and talk to each other even without any zombie action, but when it's a Godzilla film they want to jump to the wrestling without caring for the human cast and stories? Is it a matter of writing, or a matter of fandoms wanting a specific thing and not the whole package? If it's a matter of writing, then it's understandable, as some Godzilla films don't have the best of characters, or best of writing, especially the Showa era, which might have contributed to the lack of interest in them. But to say there were no interesting characters to carry the story without the monsters is a huge lie, as there are tons of memorable characters that are both enjoyable and intriguing to have with their share of iconic moments done by great actors of their time. All the way from Dr. Yamane, who wanted to know what keeps Godzilla alive to know why radiation poisoning is not killing Godzilla, to Randal Yaguchi, who wanted to save his nation by changing the system. One of the most iconic scenes in the 2014 Godzilla film was the Halo jump sequence, a human-centric sequence not focused on the monsters. Yet it's one of the most memorable moments in the entire film. And that's just one sequence in one film. There are other moments spread across the Japanese films, but they receive little to no attention since the fandom focuses only on the monsters. They don't notice them. You go to YouTube or any fan site and you see rankings of films or monsters, but none for the human cast or actors. The focus on wrestling is also why we don't get interesting mainstream Godzilla games. The most popular ones are always fighting games. Godzilla Monster War, Godzilla Battle Legends, Super Godzilla, the Pipework Trilogy. And if it's not a fighting game, then no one wants it. The 2014 Godzilla game is a good example. In Japan, the players loved it since it was like playing a Godzilla film for them.
Overall, Godzilla, or Godzilla vs. as known in Japan, is an amazing game for a fan, and something I would recommend as long as you are a long-time Godzilla fan, and I mean really long-time Godzilla fan. Because as a fan, you will be able to appreciate all the interesting concepts the movies had throughout the entire series that were all carried over into the game in spirit. This game is a real Godzilla game, and the best thing that I've had for the Godzilla franchise to date. I really enjoyed it, and I know that if you are not a fan, you won't be able to appreciate all the little things that the game has in store for you.
But in the West, it received harsher criticisms because it was not the fast action fighting game they expected it to be. Again, Godzilla can be utilized in other genres of games besides fighting. Personally, I want something like a kaiju simulation game. Just play as the monster doing what you want in a city or monster island, or make it a straight up city destruction game like the Rampage series, or take the concept of Godzilla Generation and improve on that. Make a game where you play as the army defending the city from monster attacks by using different kinds of plans, firepower, sedation, distractions, anything to keep your city safe. And if you want more suggestions, how about a tactical RPG in the style of Super Robot Wars? Just because it's Godzilla doesn't have to be the same fighting game over and over again. I know there's City Shrouded in Shadows where you play as humans stuck in a monster attack, and I do wish I could play it if it wasn't for the language barrier. We need more games like these. Like the films, Godzilla can be great beyond the superficialities. It just needs the people willing to do so, and for the fandom to be open about it. Because if the fandom is not willing to demand an excellent Godzilla franchise that respects their intelligence and its original vision, then Godzilla will always be the eternal joke.
All these monster fights are rigged.